Clara Whitmore pressed her father's worn Bible against her chest and blew out the last candle in the house she had held together for 6 long years. Down the hall, they were still laughing at the poor girl who dared to love a man who'd just called her unlovable in front of the whole county. By sunrise, she would be gone, and Nathaniel Mercer would learn exactly what his careless words had cost him. If you love stories where a woman finally claims her worth, subscribe and follow this one to the very end. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? Clara Whitmore had saved the Mercer summer supper 3 separate times before a single guest ever crossed the threshold, and not one living soul would ever know it. The first time was at dawn when the Iceman came up short, and half the county's finest families were due by dusk. The second was at noon, when the cook took to weeping in the pantry because the venison had turned and there was no time to send to town. The third was an hour before sundown, when the seating cards for the long table had been shuffled by a careless hand, and Judge Alden's widow had been set beside the very man who'd sued her late husband over a fence line. Clara fixed all 3, quietly, the way she fixed everything. "You're a marvel, Miss Whitmore," the cook whispered, wiping her red eyes. "I don't know what this house would do without you." "You'd do fine, Hetty," Clara said, already moving. "You always do. Now the fish, did the boy bring it up cold or warm?" "Cold, ma'am, on your say." "Good. Then we've a supper after all." She said it plainly, without pride. Pride was a thing Clara Whitmore had learned to set down long ago, same as a woman sets down a heavy pail so she can carry it farther. By the time the carriages began to roll up the long drive, the Mercer house glowed like it had been waiting all its life for exactly this night. Nobody would guess it had nearly burned down around the edges by afternoon. That was the whole art of it. A house held together right never looks like it was ever coming apart. "Clara." The voice was old and sharp and warm all at once. Mrs. Abigail Mercer, 63 years old, and leaning hard on her cane, caught the younger woman by the wrist as she passed. "Sit down, just for 1 minute. You've been on your feet since God knew it was morning." "I can't, ma'am. The Ashfords are here, and Mrs. Ashford will want—" "The Ashfords can wait." "Nobody makes the Ashfords wait." Abigail's mouth twitched. "You do. You just don't tell them." Clara almost smiled. Almost. "Please, ma'am, let me see this night through, then I'll sit." The old woman held her a moment longer, and there was something in her eyes, something searching, almost sorrowful, as if she saw a great deal more than Clara wished to be seen. "You give too much to this family, girl," Abigail said quietly. "One of these days, somebody's going to notice, and I only pray to heaven it's the right somebody." Clara did not ask what she meant. She was afraid she already knew. She gently freed her wrist, tucked a loose curl behind her ear, and went to greet the Ashfords. Nathaniel Mercer stood at the head of his own parlor, like a man who had never once wondered whether the floor beneath him was sound. He was 34 years old, broad through the shoulder, weathered from years riding his own land, and 2 harder years riding it for his country in the late war. He wore his wealth the way he wore his coat, without thinking much on it. Men liked him because he was fair. Women liked him because he did not seem to know he was handsome. And every soul in the county agreed that Nathaniel Mercer was a good man. He was. That was the trouble. He was a good man who had simply never learned to look. "Mercer!" boomed old Colonel Ashford, pumping his hand. "Fine spread. Finest table in 3 counties. Your mother's hand, I reckon." "My mother's and the good Lord's," Nathaniel said easily. "I can't take a lick of credit. I'd starve in my own house if left to manage it." The men laughed. Clara, passing behind them with a tray, did not. "And who does manage it?" This from Lydia Ashford, 25, golden-haired, dressed in a blue that had cost more than Clara earned in a year. She smiled up at Nathaniel with the certainty of a woman who has been told since childhood that she was the prize at the end of every road. "Surely a man like you keeps a small army." "Not so small," Nathaniel admitted. "There's Hetty in the kitchen, old Samuel with the horses, and—" He paused, his brow furrowed as though the thought cost him effort. "There's Miss Whitmore, of course, my mother's companion. She sees to things." "She sees to things," Lydia repeated, amused. "How dutiful." "She's dependable," Nathaniel said. And that was all. That was the whole of what he had to say about the woman who had that very afternoon saved his supper 3 times over. Dependable. Clara set the tray down without a sound. She did not let her face change. 6 years had taught her that too. A woman in her position could weep in the pantry like Hetty, or she could keep her chin level and her hands steady, and Clara had chosen level and steady so long ago, she scarcely remembered choosing it. But something in her had heard the word dependable and set it down someplace deep like a stone dropped in a well, and she knew she would be hearing it fall for a long while yet. The supper went beautifully, of course. Clara made certain of it. She refilled what needed refilling and quieted what needed quieting. When the judge's widow grew loud, Clara appeared at her elbow with a soft word. When a servant boy dropped a tureen in the passage, it was cleaned and gone before a single guest turned a head. When Nathaniel forgot the name of a man, he ought to have known an alderman's cousin, come all the way from Baltimore. Clara murmured it to him as she passed. So quiet the man never knew he'd been forgotten at all. "Mr. Pruitt," Nathaniel said, catching it. "Forgive me. Mr. Pruitt, welcome to my home." The alderman's cousin beamed, flattered to be remembered. Nathaniel never once wondered how he'd remembered. That was the shape of it night after night, year after year. Clara stood just behind the whole bright life of the Mercer house, close enough to keep it running far enough that no one ever caught the sight of the hands doing the work. And she had loved him the entire time. She would not have called it that if you'd asked her. She'd have called it respect, loyalty, gratitude to the family that had taken in a poor minister's daughter with nothing to her name but a Bible and a good hand for figures. But it was love, and Clara knew it was love, and she had spent 6 years folding it up smaller and smaller so it would fit somewhere no one could see. She loved the way he was gentle with his horses, the way he read to his mother when he thought no one watched, the way he'd once in the worst winter ridden 4 hours through snow to carry medicine to a tenant's dying child, and never told a living soul he'd done it. She had told no one either. She only knew because she'd been the one who'd wrapped the medicine and pressed it into his hands and said, "Ride safe, sir." He hadn't remembered that in the morning. She had remembered it for 2 years. It happened after supper in the parlor when the men had their pipes and the women their tea, and the whole room was warm and loose and laughing. It was Colonel Ashford who started it, red-faced and jolly with wine. "Now tell me true, Mercer," he said, jabbing his pipe at his host. "How does a bachelor your age keep a house this fine, and stay a bachelor? A man doesn't run a home like this on his own. There's a woman's hand in every corner of it." He winked broadly. "You keeping a secret from us?" The room chuckled. Lydia's smile went thin. "No secret, Colonel," Nathaniel said. "Only Miss Whitmore." "Miss Whitmore!" The Colonel roared, as though it were the finest joke he'd heard all season. "The little companion! Why, the poor creature's half in love with you, Mercer, plain as day. Look how she flutters about you. Runs your whole world better than any wife could dream. I'd wager she's been carrying a torch for you these 6 years, and you too thick to notice." And the room laughed, not cruelly. That was the thing Clara would think about later in the dark. It was not cruel laughter. It was easy laughter, comfortable laughter, the laughter of people who did not think a poor woman's heart was a thing that could break, because they had never once considered she might have one. Clara stood by the window with a teapot in her 2 hands, and she went very, very still. Nathaniel could have said nothing. He could have laughed it off gentle. He could have said Miss Whitmore has been a blessing to this family, and let it lie. Instead, he smiled that easy, handsome smile, and lifted his glass and said the words that Clara Whitmore would carry with her to the end of her life. "Miss Whitmore," he said lightly, "deserves a dreamer, not a man like me." And the room laughed harder, because they understood him to mean not her, never her, because they understood him to mean the very idea was gentle nonsense, a kindly little joke that a woman like Clara and a man like Nathaniel were as far apart as the 2 ends of the earth, and everybody in the warm, bright room knew it and found it sweet. Clara understood him to mean it too. 6 years collapsed in the space of one breath. She did not drop the teapot. She would be proud of that later, proud in the small, cold way a person is proud of surviving something. She set it down on the sideboard with a hand that did not shake, and she smiled the polite, invisible smile she had worn every day of her life in that house, and she said in a voice that carried just enough, "Shall I bring more tea, ma'am?" "Please, dear," said Mrs. Ashford, not even looking at her, and Clara went to fetch it. She walked out of this parlor at a perfectly ordinary pace. She walked down the passage at a perfectly ordinary pace. And only when she reached the dark of the back stair, where no one could see, did she stop and press her back against the cool wall and put one hand flat over her own mouth. She did not weep. She was too far past weeping. She only stood there in the dark and understood all at once, and completely, a thing she had spent 6 years refusing to understand. He did not see her. He had never seen her. To Nathaniel Mercer, she was not a woman at all, not someone who could love or be loved or be wounded. She was part of the house. She was dependable. She was the hand that fixed the supper and the voice that supplied the forgotten name and the quiet at the edge of every room. She was furniture that happened to breathe. And the terrible thing, the thing that finally broke something loose in her chest, was that she had let herself be that. For 6 years she had made herself smaller and smaller, useful and useful and useful, and told herself that being needed was the same as being loved. It was not the same. She knew that now. She knew it the way you know a burn the instant after you've touched the stove. From the parlor faint another swell of laughter. Clara straightened. She took her hand from her mouth. She smoothed her plain gray skirt with both palms, once the way her father used to smooth the front of his coat before he climbed up to preach. Then she went and fetched the tea, and served it, and stood invisible through the rest of that long and shining night, and no one, not one soul in that whole bright laughing house, ever saw that anything at all had changed. It was near 2 in the morning before the last carriage rolled away, and the house went quiet. Clara did not go to her bed. She went instead to the small writing desk in the corner of Mrs. Abigail's sitting room, where she kept the household ledgers, and she lit a single candle, and she took out a clean sheet of paper. For a long moment, she only sat the pen in her hand, the ink drying on the nib. She thought of her father dead these 7 years, who had pressed that Bible into her hands and told her, "Clara, my girl, the Lord did not make you to spend your life apologizing for taking up room in it." She had forgotten those words. She had spent 6 years forgetting them. Sitting there in the low candlelight, she remembered them all at once, and they steadied her hand. She dipped the pen. To Mr. Nathaniel Mercer she wrote, and her writing was clear and even, and did not shake. "It has been my honor to serve your family these 6 years. I write now to give notice of my leaving. I ask no reason be given, and I offer none. I will be gone before you wake, so that no goodbyes need trouble anyone." She paused. There was a great deal more she might have said. There was 6 years of things she might have said. She might have written down every forgotten name she'd supplied, and every fire she'd put out, and every hour she'd given, and asked him whether dependable was truly all of it, all he had, when she had held his whole world in her 2 bare hands. She wrote none of it. She had too much dignity left even now, maybe especially now, to beg a man to see her worth. A worth you had to beg for was no worth at all. "I wish you every happiness," she wrote instead. "I mean that with my whole heart." And she did. That was the strangest part. Sitting there in the dark of the house she was about to leave forever, she found she meant it. Clara Whitmore. She signed her name and blew on the ink to dry it, and folded the letter once, and set it in the center of the desk where he would find it. Then she rose and took up her candle and went upstairs to pack her 2 trunks. She did not have much. 6 years in a house, and she could carry the whole of her life in 2 trunks and still have room. Her dresses plain and few. Her father's Bible worn soft at the corners. A small tin of her mother's buttons. And that was nearly all. She was folding the last of it when the door opened behind her without a knock. "So," said Mrs. Abigail Mercer, standing in the doorway in her nightdress, with her cane in one hand and her silver hair down about her shoulders. "You're going." Clara did not turn around at once. When she did, her chin was level and her hands were steady, and only her eyes gave her away. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "I'm going." The old woman looked at her for a long, long moment. And then she nodded slow, as if something she'd feared for years had finally come to pass, and there was grief in it, but there was something else in it too, something almost like relief. "Good," Abigail said softly. "It's about time, girl. It's about time." Mrs. Abigail Mercer crossed the room slower than she had in years, and she sat herself down on the edge of Clara's narrow bed, as though her old bones had suddenly gone heavier than she could bear. "Sit," she said, "beside me. 1 minute. You never once did what I asked in 6 years. Do it now." Clara set down the folded dress in her hands and sat. For a while the old woman said nothing at all. She only looked at her own hands folded over the head of her cane, and when she finally spoke, her voice had lost every bit of its usual sharpness. "I heard it," Abigail said. "In the parlor. What my son said." Clara went still. "You needn't pretend with me, girl. I'm too old and you're too tired. I heard him call you a torch-carrying spinster in front of the Ashfords and half the county, and I heard him say you deserved a dreamer, and I heard that whole room laugh at you like you were a joke somebody left on the porch." The old woman's mouth trembled. "And I sat there. God forgive me. I sat there in my chair, and I said nothing because I am an old woman and a coward, and because I've spent 63 years learning that a room full of comfortable people cannot bear to be made uncomfortable." "Ma'am, don't." Abigail lifted one thin hand. "Don't you soothe me. Don't you dare. You've spent 6 years soothing everyone in this house, and it stops tonight. Tonight somebody's going to tell you the truth, and it's going to be me, because there's nobody else left who will." Clara's throat had gone tight. "I don't need—" "You loved him." The words dropped into the little room like a stone into still water. Clara did not answer. She could not. "I've known it 2 years." Abigail went on gentler now. "Maybe 3. I watched you wrap that medicine the winter. The Hollis child took fever and pressed it into his hands, and I watched your face when he rode off into that snow, and I knew then. A woman doesn't look at a man like that over a tin of medicine. You loved him quiet the way you do everything quiet, and he never saw one moment of it." The old woman shook her head slowly. "My son. My good, blind, foolish son. He can read the weather off a sky 40 miles out. He can look at a field in April and tell you what it'll yield in September. And he looked at the finest woman ever to set foot in this house for 6 long years and saw nothing but a pair of useful hands." Clara's eyes had begun to burn. She stared at the wall and willed them dry. "It doesn't matter now, ma'am. It matters more than anything in this house. It doesn't, because I'm leaving, and that's the end of it, and there's no use. You listen to me." Abigail's hand closed hard over Clara's wrist, so hard it near hurt. The old woman's eyes had filled, but her voice came out iron. "You are the only person under this roof I've ever loved without also being disappointed in. You've fed me and read to me and sat up nights with me when my chest was bad and I couldn't get my breath, and you never once asked me for a thing. Not money, not thanks, not even a kind word. You just gave and gave and gave until there was near nothing left of you, and this family took every bit of it like it was owed. You gave me a home," Clara whispered, "when I had none. We gave you a place to disappear in." The old woman said it flat and hard. "That is not the same thing, and you know it isn't." And that broke something. Clara felt the first tear go hot down the side of her nose, and she wiped it fast with the back of her hand, and hated herself for it. Abigail let go of her wrist. She reached instead into the pocket of her nightdress and drew out something small that caught the candlelight, and she pressed it into Clara's palm, and closed the young woman's fingers around it, before Clara could even see what it was. It was cool and heavy. A silver compass, old its case worn smooth by some other hand across some other lifetime. "That belonged to my husband," Abigail said. "His father carried it before him. It's the only thing of worth I own that my son doesn't already stand to inherit, and I am giving it to you tonight, so that when the sun comes up and you walk out that door, you'll have something in your pocket that says, 'One person in this world saw you. One person knew exactly what you were worth.' Do you hear me? Clara Whitmore?" Clara could not speak. She only closed her hand tighter around the compass. Now hear the rest. The old woman leaned close, and her voice dropped low and fierce, and every word came out slow and deliberate, like she meant them to be carved somewhere. Clara could never lose them. Do not spend the rest of your life becoming smaller, so that other people can feel comfortable. You've been doing it since the day you came here, making yourself quiet, making yourself little, standing at the edge of every bright room in this county, so nobody would have to trouble themselves to notice you. You stop that now. You go out into the world and you take up every inch of room the good Lord gave you, and if it makes the comfortable people uncomfortable, then let them squirm. Clara looked down at the compass in her hand, and then up at the old woman who had in the space of a single night seen more of her than anyone had troubled to see in 6 years. I don't know where I'm going, she admitted. It was the most honest thing she'd said aloud in a long, long time. You've a friend in Baltimore, the Fairfax woman. You've spoken of her. Eleanor, yes, but I couldn't impose, I couldn't just... You could. You will. You'll write to her and you'll go and you'll build yourself a life so full and so loud that the memory of this house is nothing but a small, cold thing you keep in a drawer. Abigail pushed herself up off the bed with both hands on her cane, and she stood there swaying a moment before she steadied. And Clara, when my son finally wakes up and he will mark me, it'll take him longer than most men because he's got the heart of a lion and the eyes of a mole. But he will wake up when he does, and he comes looking. You make him earn every step. You promise me that. Don't you make it easy on him, not for 1 minute. He won't come looking, Clara said. And she believed it entirely. He doesn't even know I'm gone yet, ma'am, and he won't feel it when I am. There's Hetty for the kitchen and Samuel for the horses. He'll manage. The old woman looked at her a long moment, and then for the first time all night, something almost like a smile touched her worn face. No, said Abigail Mercer softly. No, child. I don't believe he will. Clara Whitmore left Mercer House at the gray hour before dawn, when the whole world was still holding its breath, and not even the birds had woken. She carried her 2 trunks down herself one at a time, refusing old Samuel's help when he shuffled out sleep-eyed to the stable to find her hitching a ride into town on the miller's cart. Miss Whitmore. Samuel stood there in his nightshirt, bewildered. Where it ain't even light yet. Where you going with them trunks? Away, Samuel. Away where? Does the master know? Does Mrs. Abigail? Mrs. Abigail knows. Clara set the second trunk on the cart bed and turned to the old groom, and she took both his rough hands in hers. You've been good to me, Samuel. You always were kind. I want you to know I'll remember it. The old man's face crumpled. He had known her 6 years and never once seen her leave the property for longer than a market day, and something in the set of her shoulders now told him this was different. This was for good, and he did not have the words for it. It don't seem right, was all he could manage. It don't seem right you slipping off in the dark like this, like you done something wrong. You ain't never done nothing wrong a day in your life. No, Clara agreed quietly. I haven't, and that's exactly why I'm going. She climbed up onto the cart. The miller flicked his reins, and Clara Whitmore rode away from Mercer House without once looking back. One hand closed tight around a silver compass in her pocket, and she did not let herself cry until the house was well out of sight behind the trees. Then she cried all the way to town, and then she stopped and dried her face and did not cry again. It was near noon when Nathaniel Mercer came down to break his fast, and the first thing he noticed was that his coffee was cold. The second thing he noticed was that no one had laid the fire in his study. The third thing, and the thing that finally made him frown, was the folded letter sitting square in the center of Clara Whitmore's writing desk with his own name on the front of it, in that clear, even hand he'd seen on 1,000 ledger pages and never once truly looked at. He read it standing up. He read it a second time sitting down. Then he set it on his knee and stared at the wall for a while, and there was a strange, off-balanced feeling in his chest, like the moment you set your foot down on a stair that isn't there. Hetty? He found the cook in the kitchen, and she was crying, and there was flour up to her elbows, and something burning in the oven behind her, and she made no move to save it. "Hetty, where is Miss Whitmore this morning?" "Her desk." "She's gone, Mr. Mercer." Hetty wiped her eyes with the back of one floury wrist. "Gone before light. Samuel saw her off on the miller's cart with all her things. She ain't coming back. She said her goodbyes to him and to your mother and to nobody else." The cook's chin wobbled. "She didn't even say goodbye to me. 6 years and she didn't—" She broke off, unable. "Gone." Nathaniel repeated the word as though it were in a foreign tongue. "Gone where?" "How should I know, sir? She never told me nothing. Miss Whitmore never told anybody nothing. She just did things. She just fixed things and kept things and held things together, and now she's gone and nothing's going to work right ever again. And there's a leg of mutton in that oven turned to charcoal, because I don't know how she kept track of it all. I never did know that was always her." And Hetty sat down hard on a kitchen stool and put her apron over her face and sobbed. Nathaniel stood in the middle of his own kitchen and did not know what to do. He was a man accustomed to knowing what to do. In the field, in the war, in the endless business of a large estate, Nathaniel Mercer always knew the next thing. And here, now faced with a weeping cook, and a cold breakfast, and a letter that said nothing, and everything he found, he did not have the first idea what the next thing was. "She'll have gone to family," he said at last, reaching for solid ground. "She has people somewhere." "She ain't got people, sir." Hetty lowered the apron and looked at him with a kind of pity that made his skin prickle. "Her daddy died 7 years back, and her mama long before. That's why she come here in the first place. She ain't got a soul in this world, or she didn't. Reckon she's out to find some now." Nathaniel went back to his study. He picked up the letter and read it a third time. "I ask no reason be given, and I offer none." But he knew the reason. He had known it the moment he'd read the letter, if he was honest. And Nathaniel Mercer was above all else an honest man, even when the truth cut him. He heard his own voice again, easy and careless, in the warm parlor. "Miss Whitmore deserves a dreamer. Not a man like me." He'd meant it kindly. God help him, he'd actually meant it as a kindness, a gentle turning aside of the Colonel's crude joke, a way of saying, "Leave the poor woman be." He'd thought he was defending her. He sat with that a long while. And slowly, like cold water finding every crack in a stone, it came to him what the words must have sounded like from where she stood. Not a defense, a dismissal. In front of the whole county. Not her, never her. The very idea's a joke. "Oh," Nathaniel said it aloud to the empty room. "Just that." "Oh." He did not yet understand the half of it. He did not yet know what he'd lost, truly not in his bones. That would take weeks. That would take the slow ruin of everything he'd built without ever knowing who was holding it up. But he understood this much sitting alone in his study, with her letter in his hand, that he had said a cruel thing to a good woman, and that she had walked out of his house rather than stay one more night under a roof with a man who'd said it, and that he could not for the life of him remember the last time he'd looked her full in the face. He could not remember it because it had never happened. That was the thing that finally sat him back in his chair. In 6 years, he had never once looked Clara Whitmore full in the face. The first week, Nathaniel told himself it would sort itself out. It did not sort itself out. It began small, the way a barn fire begins small. The tenant families who came up to the house on quarter day for their allotments stood milling in the yard with nobody to see to them. And when Nathaniel finally came out himself, he found he did not know the half of their names, nor which widow was owed extra for the winter, nor which family had the sick child, nor which man had lost his plow horse and been promised the loan of a Mercer team. "Miss Whitmore always knew," said old Ezra Coombs, turning his hat in his hands. "She kept it all in a book, Mr. Mercer. Every family, every need. She'd have it settled before we'd hardly asked." "What book?" Nathaniel said. "Where?" But nobody knew. Clara had kept it in her head as much as on paper, and what she'd written down, she'd written in a shorthand of her own devising, and Nathaniel found her ledgers that night and opened them and stared at columns of figures that made no sense to him at all. Initials and small marks and sums that didn't seem to add to anything until he realized with a slow, cold horror that they added to everything. That every mark was a person. That every small sum was a life she'd been quietly holding up out of her own thin wages. He found a column headed only H, and beside it, over 2 years, a running tally that came to nearly $40. $40 from a woman who earned $12 a year. "Who is H?" he asked Hetty the next morning. The cook looked at the ledger over his shoulder, and her face did something complicated. "That'll be the Hollis family, sir. Out past the low creek. Widow Hollis and her 4 little ones. Her man drowned 2 springs back." Hetty hesitated. "Miss Whitmore paid the schooling for the 3 eldest, and the doctor that time the baby took croup, out of her own money, sir. She made me swear never to say, made everybody swear." Nathaniel closed the ledger very slowly. "How many?" he said. "How many people did she—" "I couldn't say, sir." Hetty's voice had gone thick again. "I only know the ones that touched my kitchen. There's more I never knew about, I'd wager. She wasn't one to let her left hand know what her right was doing." The cook shook her head. "The whole county leaned on that woman, Mr. Mercer, and near none of 'em knew they was leaning." By the second week, the letters had begun to pile up. Nathaniel had never in his life managed his own correspondence. He knew this now, the way a man knows a thing. He ought to have known all along. He had signed what was put in front of him. And what was put in front of him had always been right. And it had always been right because Clara Whitmore had made it right before it ever reached his hand. Now the letters came and no one sorted them, and they sat in a growing drift on the hall table, invoices and inquiries, and a summons from the county court. He did not answer in time because he did not understand. It was a summons and a letter from the church committee that he set aside and forgot, and which turned out to matter a very great deal. For it was the church committee in the 3rd week that finally brought the whole thing crashing down around his ears. Reverend Whitfield came up to the house himself on foot, which he had never once done in all the years Nathaniel had known him, and he stood in the front hall with his hat in his hands and an expression Nathaniel had never seen on him before. "Mr. Mercer," the Reverend said, "the Winter Relief Fund, the one your family has administered these 6 years, the one that feeds 40 families in this parish between November and March." He paused. "It's gone. Gone." Nathaniel felt the word land in his stomach like a stone. He was getting very tired of that word. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean, the accounts don't balance, sir. I mean, there's near $200 unaccounted for, and the committee is asking questions, and some of those questions have got your family's name in them, and I have come up here myself on foot before anyone else could, because I have known your mother 40 years, and I did not want you blindsided." Nathaniel's mouth had gone dry. "There's some mistake. My family has never— We've given to that fund every year. We've never taken a—" "I know that, sir. I know it in my heart. But the books don't show it, and the books are what the committee will look at, and the books were kept—" The Reverend stopped. "By Miss Whitmore," Nathaniel finished quietly. "By Miss Whitmore, who, as I understand, left your service." The old minister looked at him steadily. "Mr. Mercer, that woman kept the cleanest books this parish has ever seen. In 6 years there was never a penny out of place, and half the time she was making up the shortfalls out of her own pocket and never saying a word. If those accounts don't balance now, it is because she is not here to balance them, and there is nobody left in this whole county who understands the system she built." The Reverend's voice gained an edge. "You had a treasure in your house, sir. Do you know that a genuine treasure? And I have watched your family walk past her for 6 years like she was a coat rack." Nathaniel said nothing. There was nothing to say. Every word was true, and each one landed like a blow. "Where is she?" the Reverend asked. "I don't know." "You don't know?" The old man's eyebrows rose. "She kept your accounts, ran your household, held up half this parish, and lived under your roof for 6 years, and you don't know where she's gone." "No, Reverend," said Nathaniel Mercer, and he heard how it sounded, and he did not try to soften it. "I don't. I never asked her a single thing about herself in 6 years. I don't know where she was born. I don't know if she has family. I don't know what she does on her afternoons, or what she reads at night, or what she wanted out of this life." He drew a breath that hurt going in. "I know she takes her tea plain. That's the whole of what I know about her. 6 years, and I know she takes her tea plain." The Reverend looked at him for a long moment, and something in his hard old face softened into something worse than anger. It softened into pity. "Well," he said, settling his hat back on his head, "you'd best find out the rest then, hadn't you? Before the whole county decides your family are thieves. And before—" He stopped himself. "Before what?" "Before you find you've lost more than a set of clean books, son." And the Reverend turned and walked back down the drive on foot, the way he'd come, leaving Nathaniel Mercer alone in the wreckage of a life he had never once understood was being held together by a woman he had never once bothered to see. 200 miles north, in the bright bustle of Baltimore, Clara Whitmore was discovering something she had not known in 6 years, and perhaps not ever in her whole life. She was discovering what it felt like to be seen. "Clara Whitmore, you sit right back down." Eleanor Fairfax pushed her firmly into a chair the moment she tried to rise and clear the tea things. "You are a guest in this house, not a servant, and if I catch you tidying up after me one more time, I shall put you out on the street, I mean it. You are here to rest. You are here to be looked after for once in your blessed life. Now sit." Clara sat. It felt strange, wrong, almost unbearable to sit while another woman poured. Her hands did not know what to do with themselves. Eleanor watched her, this friend she'd known since girlhood and not laid eyes on in 9 years, and her clever face was full of a sorrow she was too kind to speak aloud. "They wrung you dry down there," Eleanor said finally. "Didn't they? That fine family of yours?" "They were good to me, Eleanor." "Were they?" Clara opened her mouth to defend them. It was habit. It was 6 years of habit. And then she thought of Nathaniel's easy smile and the whole room laughing, and she closed her mouth, and after a moment she said very quietly, "No, I don't suppose they were. I suppose I only wanted them to be so badly that I told myself they were." She looked down at her own worn hands. "That's the shameful thing, Eleanor. Not that they didn't love me. That I let myself be treated as less than I was for years, and called it belonging." Eleanor reached across the little table and took both her hands. "Well," she said briskly, because she was not a woman who wallowed, and she was not about to let her friend wallow either. "That's over now. And I have precisely the thing for a woman with a good head and a kind heart and 6 years of being wasted to make up for. Come with me Thursday. There's a society of us. Reading women, thinking women doing something with their days besides waiting to be married off. And there's a charity school on Alisana Street that is drowning for want of somebody who can keep its accounts and manage its affairs, and I have a very strong feeling," Eleanor's eyes glinted, "that I know exactly the woman for the position." Clara felt something stir in her chest that she had not felt in a long, long while. It took her a moment to recognize it. It had been so long. It was hope. The Reading Society met on Thursday evenings in the upstairs rooms of a bookseller's shop, and Clara went with her hands clasped tight and her heart in her throat, certain she would be found out at once for what she was: a poor minister's daughter, a servant, a nobody who'd sat too long at the edge of other people's bright rooms. She was wrong. You're the one who kept an estate's book single-handed. A woman named Mrs. Pell, sharp-eyed and gray-haired, and clearly a person of consequence, leaned across the table with frank interest. 6 years, Eleanor tells me. And administered a parish relief fund besides. Yes, ma'am, among other duties. Among other duties. Mrs. Pell snorted. My dear, half the men on this city's charity boards couldn't administer a relief fund if their salvation depended on it, and they draw salaries for the failing. And you did it for what did they pay you? Clara told her. The whole table went silent. $12, Mrs. Pell said finally. A year. Yes, ma'am. And you paid the schooling of a widow's children out of it besides. Clara flushed. How did you... Eleanor talks. Mrs. Pell sat back. She looked at Clara Whitmore for a long moment. This quiet woman in her plain gray dress, and there was something in the older woman's eyes that Clara had seen only once before, in the face of Abigail Mercer on the night she left. It was the look of someone seeing exactly what she was worth. "Miss Whitmore," Mrs. Pell said, "I run the Alisana Street School. We have 90 children and $40 and no earthly idea how to make the one stretch to the other. We cannot pay you what you deserve. We cannot pay you the half of it. But I can promise you that not one soul in that building will ever look through you like you're a pane of glass. You'll be seen, you'll be heard, and when you fix a thing—" The old woman's mouth quirked. "Somebody will have the plain decency to say thank you. Will that do?" Clara Whitmore, who had not wept in front of a stranger in her entire adult life, had to look hard at the tablecloth for a moment before she could trust her voice. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "That will do very well." She began at the school the following Monday, and within a fortnight, it was as though she had always been there. The transformation was quiet, the way all Clara's work was quiet. But this time, somebody was watching, and this time the watching was kind. Mrs. Pell watched the accounts come into order under Clara's hand, and said so out loud in front of the whole board. The teachers watched the coal get ordered on time, and the leaking roof get mended for half what they'd been quoted, and the $40 somehow stretched to feed 90 children through a hard month, and they said so too. The children simply loved her in the direct, unguarded way of children, and hung on her skirts, and saved her the best seat by the stove, and brought her small crushed flowers from the gutters that she pressed and kept. For the first time in 6 years, Clara Whitmore laughed out loud. She was surprised by the sound of it. She had half forgotten she owned it. "You're waking up," Eleanor observed one evening watching her friend across the supper table. "You've got a color to you these days. You had none when you came." "I feel—" Clara searched for the word. "I feel like a hand that's been asleep. When it comes back, that pins and needles feeling. It's not comfortable, but at least I know I'm still there. He never wrote I Take It. The Mercer man." Clara's face closed a little the way it always did at the name. "No, why would he? I don't imagine he's thought of me twice." She managed a small, dry smile. "By now they've surely found someone to keep the books, and settle the tenants, and remember the names he forgets. I was easy enough to replace Eleanor. I made certain of that. I made myself so useful and so quiet that anyone could step into my place." Said Eleanor Fairfax, who had her own opinions on the matter, and kept them for once to herself. But Clara was wrong. She was wrong on every count. For 200 miles to the south, Nathaniel Mercer had thought of her a great deal more than twice. He had, in point of fact, thought of very little else. The church committee scandal had been the thing that broke it open, but the truth had kept coming after that day, week by week. A slow, terrible flood of everything Clara Whitmore had been and done and given all of it surfacing, now that she was gone to hold it under no longer. He'd meant only to set the accounts right and clear his family's name. He'd sat down with her ledgers and the parish books and a lamp burning low, meaning to work through the night and prove there'd been no theft, only a woman's absence. He'd proved it in the end. But that was not what kept him at the desk until dawn. What kept him was the story the ledgers told. Because once he'd cracked her private shorthand, and it took him 3 nights sweating over it, like a boy at his letters, he could read at last the true history of his own household, and it was nothing at all like the history he'd believed he was living. He found the Hollis children's schooling paid quarter by quarter out of her wages. He found the doctor's fee for the croup and the medicine, and beside it, small and unremarked, the price of a milk cow bought for the widow, so her babies would have milk in the lean months. Bought by Clara. Never mentioned by Clara. He found the winter the Coombs family's roof came down, and there in her neat hand, the cost of the timber and the nails, and a note beside it almost too faint to read. Mr. Mercer must not know he has enough on his mind. Say it came from the church. Mr. Mercer must not know. She had shielded him. Even in her own private book, even where no one would ever read it, she had thought first of sparing him the burden. She had done his own charity for him, and then hidden it so that he need not even carry the weight of knowing his people were in want. Nathaniel put his head down on his own desk in the gray light of a fourth dawn, and for the first time since he was a boy of 10, standing at his father's grave, he wept. He wept for a long time. And when he was done, he was a different man than he had been, though he did not yet know how different, nor how far that difference would drive him. He knew only that he had to find her. Not to bring her back. He was not fool enough even now to think he had any right to that. But to say the words he had never said. "Thank you. I'm sorry. I never saw you, and I should have, and the failing was mine and not yours, and it is the great shame of my life." He needed to say it to her face. He owed her that much. He owed her a great deal more, but he owed her at least that. The only trouble was that he had not the first idea where she'd gone. He asked Hetty. Hetty didn't know. He asked Samuel. Samuel knew only that she'd taken the miller's cart into town, and the miller, when Nathaniel finally ran him down, knew only that he'd set her and her trunks down at the coaching inn, and the coaching inn's keeper, after some persuading, recalled a quiet woman in gray who'd bought a seat on the northbound coach 3 weeks past. "North," Nathaniel said. "North to where?" "Coach goes all the way to Baltimore, sir, with stops between. Couldn't tell you where she got off. Kept to herself, that one. Paid her fare, said thank you kindly, and never a word besides." The innkeeper scratched his head. Odd, though. There was one thing. "What thing? Anything. Tell me." She asked was there a reading room in Baltimore, a society like for ladies. Wanted to know did I know of one. The innkeeper shrugged. Struck me odd a servant woman asking after such a thing. But there it is. That's the whole of what I've got, sir. It was not much, but it was a thread. And Nathaniel Mercer, who had spent 2 years riding harder country than this after a war, was not a man to let go of a thread. He was making arrangements to ride north himself, had got as far as ordering his horse saddled and a bag packed when his mother stopped him at the door. "And where?" said Abigail Mercer, planted square in his path with her cane. "Do you think you're going?" "North. To Baltimore. To find her." To find her. His mother's eyes narrowed. "And do what precisely once you've found her?" "To apologize. To make it right. To Mother. Please, I've a long ride ahead. To make it right." Abigail did not move an inch. "Nathaniel Amos Mercer, you listen to me. That girl gave this family 6 years of her life and got a room full of laughter for her trouble, and the laughter was led by you. You do not get to ride north and make it right like she's a fence that's fallen down. You don't get to fix her the way you fix everything else. She is not a thing to be set back in its place." The old woman's voice shook with feeling. "If you go to her, you go humble. You go slow. You go prepared to hear her say she wants nothing to do with you, and you go prepared to accept it and mean it and leave her be. Do you understand me?" Nathaniel stood very still. "I don't know that I can promise the last part," he said quietly. "The leaving her be." His mother looked at him sharply. Something moved behind her eyes, surprise, and then a slow dawning of something else. "Nathaniel." Her voice had changed. "Look at me. Look at me plain and answer me true. What is it you feel for that woman?" And Nathaniel Mercer, who had never once in 6 years asked himself that question, who had not let himself so much as approach it, stood in the doorway of his own house with his hat in his hand, and found that he did not know the answer, and that the not knowing frightened him more than anything had frightened him since the war. "I don't know," he had admitted. "I don't... Mother, I never let myself. She was always just there. She was part of the house. I never thought of her as..." He stopped. He made himself go on because he was an honest man and he had lied to himself long enough. "And now she's gone, and the house is nothing, and every room in it is wrong, and I can't sleep, and I can't eat. And I read her handwriting for hours like a man half-starved, and I don't... Mother, what is that? What do you call that?" Abigail Mercer looked at her son for a long, long moment, and then she stepped aside from the door. "I call that too late, most likely," she said softly. "But go. Go on then. Ride north. And Nathaniel. She caught his sleeve as he passed. When you find her, and you will, for you've always been a stubborn dog after a bone, when you find her you'll see. She's not the woman you left. She's the woman she was always going to be once somebody let her. And I pray to God you're man enough to bear the sight of it. He did not find her the first day, nor the second. Baltimore was a city, and a stranger in gray was easy to lose in it. And Nathaniel Mercer spent the better part of a week riding from inn to inn, and boarding house to boarding house, asking after a quiet woman named Whitmore, and getting nothing but blank looks for his trouble. It was on the 6th day that he thought of the reading room. She asked, was there a society like for ladies? He asked at 3 booksellers before he found the right one, and the man behind the counter when Nathaniel described her brown hair, gray dress, a way of standing very still, and watching everything, the man's face cleared at once. Oh, you'll mean Miss Whitmore. Aye? Comes to the Thursday Society upstairs regular? Sharp as a tack, that one. Mrs. Pell thinks the world of her. The bookseller looked Nathaniel up and down, taking in the good coat, and the road dust, and the haunted look about the eyes. And who might you be, sir, come asking after our Miss Whitmore? Our Miss Whitmore. Something turned over in Nathaniel's chest. Somewhere in 6 weeks, she had gone from my mother's companion to our Miss Whitmore, from a woman no one saw, to a woman a whole city seemed to have laid claim to, and he had had no part in it, and the thought was a strange and painful one. An old acquaintance, he said, from Virginia. Where, forgive me, where might I find her? The school, you said. The charity school. Alisana Street. But you'll not catch her idle, sir. That woman works harder than any 3 men I know. The bookseller said it with plain pride, as though Clara's industry were something the whole street had a share in. Go careful with her, whoever you are. She's had a hard road, anybody can see it. She's only just come into her own. It'd be a shame to see anybody knock her back down. Nathaniel Mercer stood on the pavement outside the bookseller's shop in a city 200 miles from home, and felt the full weight of what those words meant. He had knocked her down. He was the reason she'd had the hard road. And now here he stood, road filthy and heartsore, about to walk into the new life she'd built without him, and remind her of the old one she'd fled. He almost turned back. God help him. He stood there a full minute and almost climbed back on his horse and rode home, and let her be the way his mother had bid him be prepared to do. But he thought of her ledgers. He thought of Mr. Mercer must not know he has enough on his mind. He thought of 6 years of being shielded and served and held up by a woman he had never once thanked, and he knew that whatever it cost him, whatever she said to him, however she looked at him, he owed her the sight of his face and the sound of the words. He owed her that, or he was no kind of man at all. He found Alisana Street as the afternoon was going gold. He found the charity school plain and busy children's voices spilling out the open windows. And he stood across the street in the shadow of a doorway, working up the courage of a man who had once charged a British line without flinching, and he watched the door. And after a while the door opened and Clara Whitmore came out onto the step. He nearly didn't know her. She wore gray. Still but a better gray, and she stood. She stood differently, straight and easy, her chin up, laughing at something a small boy was saying as he tugged her hand. There was color in her face, and light in it. And when a woman called to her from an upstairs window, she called back something clever that made the whole street laugh, and Nathaniel Mercer stood frozen in the doorway across the road, and understood all at once and completely the thing his mother had tried to warn him of. This was not the quiet woman at the edge of his parlor. This was not dependable Miss Whitmore, who supplied his forgotten names. This was a whole person, vivid and alive, and wanted, standing in the full gold light of a life she had built with her own 2 hands out of the wreckage he had made. And she had never looked more beautiful, and she had never been further out of his reach, and he had done it. He had made her this by driving her away, and in the making he had lost her entirely. He stepped forward off the curb, and Clara turned, still laughing, the child's hand in hers, and saw him. The laugh died on her face. The color drained from it. And for one long, terrible moment, across the width of a Baltimore street, in the gold of a summer afternoon, Clara Whitmore looked at Nathaniel Mercer, as though she were seeing a ghost rise up out of a grave she had buried with her own hands, and neither one of them said a single word. The child tugged at her hand. "Miss Whitmore! Miss Whitmore, you've gone all funny!" Clara did not answer him. She could not. Her whole body had turned to something cold and far away, and the sounds of the street, the children, the cart wheels, the woman still calling from the upstairs window, all of it went thin and distant, as if she were hearing it from the bottom of a well. Nathaniel Mercer was standing across the street from her, here, in Baltimore, 200 miles from where she'd left him, road dusty and hollow-eyed, and looking at her with an expression she had never once seen on his face in 6 years, and could not for the life of her read now. "Miss Whitmore." The child pulled harder. "Do you know that man?" "Go inside, Thomas," she said. Her voice came out steady, and she was distantly amazed at it. "Tell Mrs. Pell I'll be a few moments. Go on now." The boy went, throwing a suspicious look over his shoulder at the strange man across the road. And then it was just the two of them, and the width of a street, and 6 years of silence. Nathaniel took off his hat. It was such a small thing, and such an old habit. But she had never once seen him do it for her. He had tipped his hat to Lydia Ashford 100 times. He had never done it for the companion in gray. He did it now, slow and deliberate, and held it against his chest with both hands like a man at a graveside. "Clara," he said, her Christian name. He had never once used her Christian name. In 6 years it had always been Miss Whitmore, and even that only when he could not avoid speaking to her at all. "Mr. Mercer?" She did not move from the step. She would not go to him, and she would not run from him, and she made herself stand exactly where she was, with her chin level and her hands folded. "You're a long way from home." "I am." He took a step forward. She saw his throat work. "I've been looking for you 6 days. Then you've wasted 6 days. She said it without heat, which was somehow worse than heat. "You should go home, Mr. Mercer. Whatever's brought you here, I can't imagine it can't be settled by post. It can't." He crossed the street. Then not quickly, not the way a man rushes, but slow and careful, the way a man approaches a horse that might bolt. He stopped a good 10 feet from her, and came no nearer, and she understood dimly that he was leaving her room, that he had come all this way, and was still somehow leaving her room to turn and go inside. There are things a man can't say by post. Things he's got no right to say anyway, but to your face hat in his hand, so you can see he means them. Clara's heart was beating very hard. She hated that it was beating hard. She had thought herself past this thought, she had buried it clean and deep, and here it was again, the moment he said her name alive and treacherous in her chest. "Say it then," she said. "Whatever it is, say it and be done, and then please, Mr. Mercer, leave me my afternoon." He had rehearsed it. All 6 days on the road, all the long nights in strange inns, he had turned the words over and over, polished them, ordered them. He had known exactly what he meant to say. Standing in front of her now, every word of it went straight out of his head, because she was looking at him. Not through him the way the county looked at a servant. Not up at him the way Lydia looked at a prize. She was looking at him level and clear and unafraid. A woman who had stopped needing anything from him at all, and it undid him completely. "I read your ledgers," he said. It was not what he'd meant to begin with. It came out of him raw. "After you left, I couldn't the accounts, the church fund, the committee thought, it doesn't matter what they thought. I sat down to set it right, and I found Clara. I found all of it. The Hollis children, the milk cow, the Coombs roof. 6 years of you were paying for half the county out of $12 a year, and you never said a word, not to me, not to anyone, and in your own private book, where no one would ever read it, you wrote—" His voice cracked clean in half. He stopped. He made himself go on. "You wrote Mr. Mercer must not know. He has enough on his mind. You were carrying my own people and hiding it so I wouldn't have to feel the weight of them. You were protecting me from my own conscience. And I never—" "Stop!" Clara's voice was low. "I never once thanked you. I never once looked at you." "Stop." Sharper now. Her hands had curled into fists at her sides. "You will not do this. Clara, you will not come to my street, to my school, to the one place in this world that is mine, and stand there weeping over my ledgers like you've discovered something." Her voice was shaking now, but not with tears, with something hotter and older and long held down. "Do you know what those ledgers were to me, Mr. Mercer? They were my whole heart. Every one of those names was somebody I loved, somebody I saw, because seeing people was the one thing left to me that nobody could take. And you never looked at those books once in 6 years. Not once. And now you've read them, and you're moved, and you've ridden 200 miles to tell me you're moved, and you want what? What do you want from me? Do you want me to comfort you, to tell you it's all right? You didn't know you meant no harm. Is that it? Have you come all this way for me to make you feel better about it?" The words hit him like open-handed blows, one after another, and each one landed true, and he stood and took them, because there was nothing else he could do. "No," he said when she stopped. "No, I don't want you to comfort me. God knows I don't deserve it, and I didn't come for it." "Then what?" "I came to say I'm sorry." The words came out of him plain and terrible. "That's all. That's the whole of it. I came to say I'm sorry, and I know it's not worth the paper it isn't written on, and I know sorry doesn't give you back 6 years, and I know—" He drew a breath. "I know what I said, in the parlor, in front of everyone. She deserves a dreamer, not a man like me. I've heard those words in my own head every hour of every day for 6 weeks. I meant them kindly. Clara. God help me. I did. I thought I was turning aside a crude joke. I thought—" He shook his head hard. "It doesn't matter what I thought. I know now how it sounded. I know now what it did. I stood in my own parlor and told a room full of people that the idea of you was a joke when the truth—" He stopped. The truth sat in his throat enormous, and he could not get it past. Clara waited. Her face had not softened, but she waited. "When the truth," Nathaniel said very quietly, "is that there was never a woman in that county, in that state, in this whole country, fit to stand in the same room as you. And I was the fool. I was always the fool. Not you, never you." For a moment she said nothing. The street went on around them, the carts, the children, the ordinary business of an ordinary afternoon, and the two of them stood in the middle of it like figures cut from some other harder story. And then Clara Whitmore laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was short and low, and it had a terrible weariness in it, and it was to Nathaniel worse than any weeping could have been. "You're not cruel, Mr. Mercer," she said. "I want you to know I don't think you're cruel. I've had 6 weeks to think on it, and I've decided you were never cruel to me. Cruelty takes noticing. Cruelty means you saw me and chose to wound me, and you never did see me, so you couldn't have. You were just—" She searched for the word, and when she found it, it fell between them soft and final as a stone into deep water. "Late. You were simply late. 6 years too late to see me, and now 6 weeks too late to matter. Clara, I loved you." She said it flat and plain, and she watched the words go into him like a knife, and she did not take them back. "There, I've said it. You may as well hear it from me as from a room full of drunk men laughing. I loved you for 6 years, and you never knew, and I made sure you never knew, because I understood exactly what I was to you, and I was too proud to be pitied for it. So I made myself smaller. I made myself quiet and useful and invisible. And I told myself that being needed was enough, that being dependable was a kind of love. And I let you and your whole shining family use me up year after year and call it belonging." Her voice did not break. It was the not breaking that made it unbearable. "And then one night I heard you laugh, and I understood that I had spent 6 years of my one life becoming small enough to fit into the corner of a man who would never ever look at me. And I stopped. That's all. That's the whole story. I stopped." Nathaniel could not speak. There was nothing in him to speak with. And now here you are," she went on, 200 miles from home, having finally read the books, and finally done the arithmetic, and finally seen me. And do you know the cruelest thing? The thing I keep turning over. It's that you're too late in the exact wrong way. If you'd never come, I'd have gone on healing. I'd have gone on building this. And you'd have stayed a closed door I'd learned to walk past. She shook her head slowly. But you had to come and knock. You had to make me feel it all again. And that Mr. Mercer, that's the only unkind thing you've ever done to me. Coming here, making me remember. She turned to go up the steps. I was going to tell them it was me. Her foot stopped on the step. The church committee, Nathaniel said to her back. The $200. They were ready to blame the family, and it would have been easiest thing in the world to let them think it was your bookkeeping gone wrong. A woman who'd left. Nobody to defend her. I could have cleared the family name and blackened yours, and no one would ever have known the difference, and half the county was already halfway to believing it. He watched her shoulders. I stood up in front of the whole committee, Clara, and I told them the truth. That the fund never lost a penny in 6 years, that every shortfall was made good out of your own wages, that the only reason the books don't balance now is that the woman who'd been quietly holding them up out of her own pocket finally got tired of being invisible and left. I told them you were the finest bookkeeper and the most generous soul this parish ever had, and that if there was a thief in the story, it was a family that took 6 years of a woman's labor and paid her $12 and a room and never once said thank you. Clara had gone very still. Reverend Whitfield stood up after me. Nathaniel went on quieter, and he said the same. And old Ezra Coombs stood up and told the whole room about his roof, and the widow Hollis stood up. She walked 4 miles into town to do it. Clara with all 4 children, and she told them about the milk cow and the schooling and the doctor, and she was crying, and by the end of it, there wasn't a dry eye in that hall, and the committee voted then and there to strike your name from every question and enter into the record a formal thanks to Miss Clara Whitmore for 6 years of unpaid service to this parish. He paused. It's written down now, in the parish book, in ink, with the gratitude of the whole congregation. I made them write those exact words. It's the one thing I've done in this whole sorry business that I'm not ashamed of. For a long moment, Clara did not turn around. When she did, her eyes were bright and wet, and her voice, when it came, was not steady anymore. Why? She said. Why would you do that? It would have been so easy to let them blame me. It would have saved your family and cost you nothing. Because it was true, Nathaniel said simply, and because I spent 6 years letting you carry things that weren't yours to carry. I wasn't going to let you carry one more, not even a lie, especially not a lie. He turned his hat once in his hands. I didn't do it to buy anything from you, Clara. I want you to know that. I didn't do it so you'd forgive me or think better of me. I did it because it was the truth, and you weren't there to tell it, so somebody had to. I'd have done it if I never saw your face again. I'd do it 100 times over. Sure. She had to sit down. She did it right there on the school steps, sinking down onto the worn stone as though her legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold her, and she pressed the heels of both hands hard against her eyes, and for a while she did not speak at all. Nathaniel did not go to her. Everything in him strained toward her. Every instinct in his body said, "Go, kneel down, take her hands," and he held himself where he was, because he understood at last that going to her was the one thing he had no right to do. So he stood 10 feet off with his hat in his hands and let her weep. And it was the hardest thing he had ever done in his life, harder than the war, harder than his father's grave. "I don't understand you," Clara said at last, muffled behind her hands. "I spent 6 years understanding you better than you understood yourself, and now I don't understand you at all." "That's fair," he said. "I don't much understand myself these days either." She lowered her hands. Her face was wet and raw and furious, and something else, something underneath the fury that neither of them was ready to name. "You should have stayed the man I left." It would have been so much easier if you'd stayed the man I left. A careless man. A blind man. A man I could hate clean." She wiped her face with the heel of her hand roughly the way she had on the miller's cart. "Instead, you have to go and become this. Whatever this is. A man who rides 200 miles and takes off his hat and defends my name to a whole county and stands there and lets me say every cruel thing I've stored up for 6 weeks and doesn't once try to stop me or excuse himself." Her voice cracked. "How am I supposed to hate that man, Nathaniel, tell me? How am I supposed to walk back up these steps and close the door on that man and go on with my life?" It was the first time she had ever said his Christian name. He heard it land, and something in his chest turned clean over. "You don't have to hate me," he said carefully, "and you don't have to forgive me. I didn't come for either one. I came to say the thing I owed you, and I've said it, and now I'll go if you want me to. I mean that. You say the word, and I'll get on my horse and ride south, and you'll never see me again. And I'll count it a mercy I didn't deserve that I got to say it to your face at all." "Is that what you want? To go, no?" The word came out of him instantly before he could dress it up or soften it. "God, no. It's the last thing I want. But what I want stopped mattering the day I let a room laugh at you and did the laughing myself. This isn't about what I want anymore, Clara. It's about what you want. Maybe for the first time in 6 years, it's about what you want. So you tell me, do I stay or do I go?" And there it was. The thing she had not expected. The thing that broke her open the rest of the way. For 6 years, no one had asked her what she wanted. Not once. She had been asked to fetch and to fix and to manage and to serve, and she had done it all gladly, and no living soul in that house had ever once turned to her and said, "What do you want, Clara?" as if her wanting were a thing that could tip a scale. And here he was, the last man on earth she'd have expected it from, asking her the one question no one had ever asked, and meaning it and waiting on her answer as though his whole life hung on it. "I don't know," she said, and it was the truth, and it terrified her. "I don't know what I want. I only got done learning how to want anything at all, Nathaniel, and now you've come, and I don't know. I need—" She stood up off the steps unsteady. "I need you to go. Not forever. I won't say forever because I'm not a liar and I don't know that I mean it. But I need you to go today now and let me think, because I cannot think with you standing there looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm the only thing in the world," she said. "Nobody's ever looked at me like that. And I've waited my whole life for somebody to, and I can't have the first person be you and have it come now when I've only just learned to stand up straight without you. It isn't fair. Do you understand? It isn't fair that you learned to see me at the exact moment I stopped needing you to." Nathaniel bowed his head. "No," he said. "It isn't fair, and I've got no one to blame for the timing but myself." He put his hat back on. He took a step back, and another, giving her the ground, giving her the room, and it cost him visibly every inch of it. "I'm at the Blue Anchor down by the harbor. I'll stay a week. Not to press you, I won't come to the school again. I won't wait outside your door. I won't so much as walk down Alisana Street unless you send for me. I'll just be there, a week. And if you don't send, I'll go home, and I'll not trouble you again, and I'll count it right that you chose it." He looked at her one last time, long as though committing her to memory. "You look well, Clara. You look like yourself. Like nobody shrunk you down to fit a corner. I did that shrinking, and I'll carry it. But I'm glad past saying that you've grown back. Whatever you decide about me, don't ever let anybody make you small again. You hear? Not even me. Especially not me." And Nathaniel Mercer tipped his hat to Clara Whitmore. A full, deliberate graveside tip of the hat, the second in his life, and the second in one afternoon. And he turned and walked back down Alisana Street, the way he'd come. And he did not look back, because he had promised himself he would leave her the dignity of the last look, and he was a man learning painfully and late how to keep the promises that cost him. Clara stood on the steps and watched him go until he turned the corner and was gone. Then she went inside, and Mrs. Pell took one look at her face and sent all 90 children home an hour early, and sat her down in the back room with a cup of tea gone cold, and did not ask her a single question, and just let her be. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed in Eleanor's spare room and stared at the ceiling, and turned it over and over, and every time she thought she had hold of what she felt, it slipped away and became something else. Anger first. That was easy. Anger was familiar. He had no right. He had no right to come and undo 6 weeks of careful healing. No right to make her feel it all fresh. No right to be good at her now when being good 6 years ago would have cost him nothing and meant everything. But underneath the anger was something harder to hold. Because the thing was, and she made herself look straight at it alone in the dark, because she had promised herself she would never again be less than honest with herself. The thing was that he had done the one thing she'd never believed he could do. He had changed. Not prettily, not with grand speeches, but really, he had sat up nights over her ledgers. He had cracked her private code. He had stood in front of a whole county and defended a servant woman's name at the cost of his family's. He had ridden 200 miles and taken off his hat and stood there and let her flay him, and had not once tried to make it easier on himself. The Nathaniel Mercer she had loved for 6 years had been a good man who could not see. This man could see. This man had learned to see. Her specifically, in all her particulars, had read her heart, off the pages of a ledger, and ridden across a state to answer it. And she did not know what to do with that. She had grieved the old Nathaniel clean. She did not have a place in her heart to put this new one. "You're not sleeping," Eleanor said from the doorway, a candle in her hand. "I heard you turning over in there for 2 hours. Come, I'll make chocolate. You'll tell me about the man who put that look on your face, or you won't, but either way, you'll not lie here torturing yourself alone." So they sat up in Eleanor's little kitchen, and Clara told her all of it, the whole story, 6 years of it, the parlor, and the laughter, and the letter, and the flight, and then Alisana Street, and the hat, and the ledgers, and do I stay or do I go? Eleanor listened to the end without interrupting, which was not like her at all. And when Clara was done, her friend was quiet for a while, warming her hands on her cup. "May I say a hard thing?" Eleanor asked finally. "You always do." "I do." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Here it is then. You keep saying it isn't fair that he learned to see you just when you stopped needing him. And you're right. It isn't." She set down her cup. But Clara needing him and wanting him were never the same thing. You needed him once when you were small and shrunk down, and told yourself being useful was being loved. That need was a sickness. You're well shut of it, and I'd not wish it back on you for the world. She leaned forward. But you don't need him now. You've your own place, your own work, your own name in this city, and people who'd walk through fire for you. You don't need one single thing from that man. Which means, don't you see that if you want him now, it'll be the first clean thing you've ever felt for him. Not a servant's need. Not a small woman clutching at the one bright thing in her gray life. A whole woman who wants nothing from him, choosing whether she'd like him in her days. That's not the same story at all, Clara. That's the opposite story. Clara stared at her. "I don't know if I want him," she said slowly. "That's the truth. I don't know. Then don't decide tonight." Eleanor covered her friend's hand with her own. "He gave you a week. Take the week. Take a month if he'll give it. You've spent 6 years jumping to serve other people's needs the very instant they arose. You are allowed, do you hear me? You are allowed to make a man wait on your own heart's timing for once in your life. If he's worth anything at all, he'll wait. And if he won't wait, then you'll have your answer, and it'll be the right one." 3 days passed. Clara went to the school. She kept the accounts and mended the roof and taught the little ones their letters and did not send to the Blue Anchor. But she thought about it every hour. On the 4th day, something happened that she had not foreseen. A boy came running up Alisana Street in the middle of the afternoon, one of the harbor boys, barefoot and breathless, and he had a name on his lips, and the name was hers. "Miss Whitmore?" "Miss Whitmore, ma'am. You're to come quick. Down the Blue Anchor. There's a gentleman took ill. A Virginia gentleman been asking after you in his fever, and the landlord don't know what to do with him, and the doctor's saying it's the summer sickness bad, and he keeps saying, 'Your name, ma'am,' over and over. He won't stop saying your name." The world tilted. What gentleman? Clara heard herself say, though she already knew. God help her, she already knew. "What's his name?" "Mercer, ma'am. A Mr. Mercer. Down from Virginia. The landlord says he's been 3 days barely eating, sitting up in that room waiting on some word that never come. And now the fever's took him. And he's bad, ma'am. He's real bad. And you're the only name he'll say." Clara was already moving. She did not remember deciding to. She did not remember reaching for her shawl or telling Mrs. Pell she was going or setting off down the street at a near run. Her skirts caught up in one fist, her heart slamming against her ribs. She only knew that somewhere between the school and the harbor, all her careful thinking, all her weeks of healing, all Eleanor's wise, clean talk of needing and wanting, all of it simply fell away. And what was left underneath it was the plain and terrible fact that Nathaniel Mercer was sick and alone in a harbor inn 200 miles from home, waiting on a word from her that she had not sent, and that the thought of losing him now, before she had even decided whether she wanted to keep him, was more than she could bear. She ran the whole way to the Blue Anchor. She took the stairs 2 at a time, and she burst through the door of the little room at the top of the inn to find him there, gray-faced and burning, tangled in the damp sheets, the landlord wringing his hands in the corner, and the doctor packing up his bag with the grim resignation of a man who has done what little he can. And Nathaniel Mercer turned his fever-bright eyes toward the sound of the door and found her face in it, and something in his ruined expression cracked open into a terrible, disbelieving relief. "Clara," he whispered. His voice was almost nothing. "You came. I didn't send for you. I promised I wouldn't send. But you came anyway. You came." And Clara Whitmore, who had spent 3 days and 4 nights carefully deciding she owed this man nothing, crossed the room in 4 steps and dropped to her knees at his bedside, and took his burning hand in both of hers and pressed it hard against her own cheek, and heard herself say in a voice she did not recognize, thick with everything she had spent 6 weeks refusing to feel, "Of course I came. You stubborn, foolish, blind, impossible man, of course I came. Don't you dare. Do you hear me, Nathaniel Mercer? Don't you dare do this. I have not forgiven you yet, and you do not get to die before I decide whether I'm going to. So you will lie still, and you will fight this, and you will live, because I did not spend 6 years loving you, and 6 weeks hating you to lose you now to a fever in a harbor inn. You will live. That is not a request." And his fever-cracked lips moved, and what came out of them was not an answer, but something that stopped her heart clean in her chest. "Ledger?" Nathaniel breathed. "Under the pillow. Before I... You have to see. Before anything. You have to see what I... It's all in the ledger, Clara. Everything I couldn't say. It's all written down. Under the pillow." Clara did not go for the ledger. That was the first thing she did. She did not go for it. Every fiber of her wanted to 6 years of curiosity and 6 weeks of grief pulling her hand toward that pillow. But she was Clara Whitmore, and she had nursed the dying before, and she knew a fevered man on the edge better than she knew her own face in a glass. And so she took his burning hand and pressed it down flat against the mattress and said in a voice gone hard and calm as a frozen river, "The ledger will keep. You will not." "Doctor." She did not turn her head. "How long's he been like this?" "Since last night, ma'am." The doctor had stopped packing his bag. Something in the way she'd come through that door had stopped him. "Fever come on him sudden. Summer sickness. I've bled him and You'll not bleed him again." She said it flat. "He's not eaten in 3 days by the landlord's account, and you've bled him on top of it. You bleed a starving man, and you'll bury him by morning. No more of that." She was already up off her knees, already stripping her shawl off, already moving with the terrible unhurried speed of a woman who has done this exact thing a dozen times in a cold Virginia winter. I want cool water, not cold and clean cloths, and I want beef broth if this house has got it, and barley water if it hasn't, and I want that window open 2 inches and not one more, and I want every one of you out of this room but me, now." The landlord fled. The doctor hesitated at the door. "Ma'am, with respect, I'm the physician here, and you've done all you know how, and it wasn't enough, and now you'll let a woman who sat up with fever her whole life have her turn." Clara met his eyes and did not blink. "I'll send for you if I need you. Go." He went, and then it was just the two of them, the way it had been on the school steps. Only now there was no width of street between them, no careful 10 feet of distance. Now there was only Clara Whitmore on her knees beside a narrow bed, wringing a cloth in cool water, and laying it across the brow of the man who had broken her heart in a Virginia parlor, and then ridden 200 miles to try and mend it. "You came," Nathaniel said again. He kept saying it low like a man who could not credit it. "You came, you came." "Hush." She smoothed the cloth against his temple. "Save your strength. You're going to need every bit of it." The ledger. Nathaniel Mercer. She took his face in both her hands and made him look at her, made his fever-glazed eyes find hers and hold them. "Listen to me. I am not going to read your ledger while you lie here burning up, because if I read it and it says what I think it says, and then you die on me, I will have to carry those words the rest of my life, and I will not do it. Do you understand? You want me to read it? Then you live long enough to watch me read it. That's the price. You want your confession heard, you'll be alive to hear the answer. Now hush and drink when I tell you, and sweat this out and live." Something moved in his ravaged face, something that might in a well man have been a smile. "There she is," he breathed. "There's the woman who ran my whole world and never let me see it. There she is." And then the fever took him back under, and he began to shake, and Clara Whitmore rolled up her sleeves and went to war. She did not leave that room for 2 days. Eleanor came and Mrs. Pell came, and both were sent away with instructions, broth and clean linen, and word to the school that Miss Whitmore would be some days absent, and both went because there was a look on Clara's face that did not brook argument, and both understood in the way women understand these things that something was being decided in that little room at the top of the Blue Anchor that had nothing to do with fever at all. The first night was the worst. The fever climbed, and near midnight he began to rave, and the things he raved were terrible to hear because they were true. "Deserves a dreamer," he muttered, thrashing. Said it in front of them all. Her face didn't even see her face 6 years. And I never once. Clara. Where's Clara? She'll know what to do. She always somebody fetch. Miss Whitmore, the whole house is falling, and only she can— No. I sent her away. I laughed, and I sent her away, and now the house is falling, and it's right that it falls. Hush now. Clara pressed the cloth to his throat, his wrists the back of his neck. Her own eyes were streaming, and she paid them no mind. Hush, I'm here. I'm right here. You're not. He caught her wrist with sudden fevered strength, his eyes wild and unseeing. You're not here. You're in Baltimore. You're free of me. That's the one good thing I did. I set you free. Stay there. Don't come back to that house, Clara. Don't you come back. They'll only make you small again. I'll only make you small again. Nathaniel. She had to pry his fingers loose. Nathaniel, look at me. I am in Baltimore. This is Baltimore. You're in Baltimore. You came to me. Do you remember? You rode 200 miles and you found me on Alisana Street and you took off your hat. His eyes cleared for just a moment. Found her. Held. I took off my hat, he whispered. You did. For you. First time in my life for you. I know. She was crying openly now and she did not care. I know you did. Now drink this. He drank and slept. And she sat by him through the small hours with his hand in hers, and somewhere in that long black night without ever quite deciding to Clara. Whitmore stopped asking herself whether she wanted this man. The question had answered itself the moment she ran the whole way to the harbor. The fever broke near dawn on the second day. She felt it break under her hand, felt the terrible dry heat give way all at once to a drench of cool sweat, felt his breathing drop from a ragged race into something slow and deep and human. And she put her face down against the mattress beside his shoulder and shook silently with a relief so total it emptied her out. When she lifted her head, his eyes were open, clear, weak as water, but clear and fixed on her, and full of a wonder that made her look away. "You stayed," Nathaniel said. His voice was a ruin, but it was his own again. "Somebody had to keep you from letting that fool doctor bleed you into the churchyard." 2 days. 2 days. He was quiet a moment, taking the measure of what that meant. 2 days. This woman who owed him nothing at his bedside night and day, wringing cloths and forcing broth and holding him through the dark. "Clara." He turned his hand over slow until his palm lay open against hers. "The ledger." "You're alive," she said. "I'm alive. Then I'll read it." She drew a breath. "But not for you. Understand that. I'm not reading it because you asked, or because you nearly died, or because I felt sorry for you burning up in this bed. I'm reading it because I want to know. For the first time in this whole long story, I'm doing a thing because I want it and not because somebody needs it of me. You follow." "I follow," he said softly. "That's Clara. That's the only way I'd want you to do anything ever again as long as you live. Because you want to. Never again because it's needed of you." She reached under the pillow. The ledger was small, plain, leather-bound, worn at the corners. The way her father's Bible was worn, the mark of a thing carried and handled and turned over many times. She recognized the type of it at once because she had kept 100 like it. An account book, a book for sums and columns and the cold arithmetic of an estate. She opened it, and her breath stopped, because it was not an account book. Or rather, it had been once some pages at the back still ruled and columned. But the front of it, page after page after page, was covered in Nathaniel Mercer's hand. That plain, square, honest hand she'd witnessed on 1,000 documents. And it was not sums at all. It was her. "Things I know about Clara Whitmore," the first page read. "Begun the third night after she left, when I understood I could not fill a single page." And beneath it, a list. Started sparse and desperate, she could see at the first entries cramped and few, a man scraping the bottom of 6 empty years for anything at all. She takes her tea plain. She has a scar on her left thumb. I do not know how she got it. I never asked. Her father was a minister. He is dead. She never speaks of him, and I never gave her cause to. And then she turned to the page and her hands were not steady, the entries changed. They grew, because he had gone looking. She understood it all at once, turning the pages. He had not been able to fill a single page from 6 years of living beside her, and so he had gone and asked. He had gone to Hetty and to Samuel and to the tenants and to the widow Hollis and to the Reverend, and he had gathered up piece by piece the woman he had lived beside for 6 years and never seen, and he had written every piece down, like a man copying out scripture. Hetty says she sings when she thinks no one hears. Hymns mostly. Her mother's Hetty thinks. Samuel says she brought sugar lumps for the horses every morning for 6 years. Every morning. I never once saw her do it. The widow Hollis says Clara sat up 3 nights with the croup baby and never told a soul, and that the baby lived, and that his name is Nathaniel after me, because Clara said I'd carried the medicine through the snow, but it was Clara who bought it, Clara who wrapped it, Clara who sent me. The child is named for me, for a kindness that was hers. I have been wearing her good deeds as my own for 6 years and never knew it." Clara made a sound she could not help. She pressed her hand to her mouth. She turned the pages. There were dozens, scores. He had filled half the book. She reads Cowper. Hetty found a volume in her room after she left with a passage marked. I have read it 40 times trying to understand what she saw in it. She gives her seat by the fire to whoever is coldest and takes the draught by the door and never says a word. When my mother's chest is bad in the night, it was always Clara who woke. My mother tells me now that she never once had to call out. Clara simply knew. She slept with her door open 6 years so she'd hear. She is braver than any man I rode with in the war. I rode with men who charged cannon. Not one of them could have done what she did, lived small and unthanked for 6 years, and then walked out the door with 2 trunks and her chin up, and built a whole life from nothing. That is a courage I do not have and never had. And then, near the end, the entries stopped being facts. I did not know I loved her. That one stood alone on a page. I want to write it plain because I have spent my whole life not saying plain things, and it has cost me the only thing that ever mattered. I did not know I loved her. I think I loved her for years and called it convenience. I think every time I forgot a name and she supplied it every time the house ran smooth, and I never wondered why. Every time I came in from the cold and there was a fire already lit, I think that was love. Hers poured out on me daily, and I drank it every day of my life, like a man drinks water, and never once thanked the well. And I think God forgive me for how late I am. I think I loved her back the whole time, and was too much a coward and a fool to know my own heart, until the house went cold and I understood the warmth had never come from the hearth. It came from her. It always came from her. The last entry was dated 4 days past, the day after she'd sent him away from the school. Written she understood in this very room in the 3 days he'd sat here waiting on a word from her that never came, going hungry, growing weak until the fever found him. If she never sends for me, I will go home and I will keep this book, and I will read it every day of my life, so that at least one man in this world will have finally learned Clara Whitmore by heart. It is the least I owe her. It is a debt I will spend my whole life paying and never clear, and I find I do not want to clear it. I want to owe her forever. I want to spend the rest of my days learning her, and never once take a single thing about her for granted again. That is all I want. That is the whole of what is left of me. Her name written down, and a lifetime to keep writing it. Clara closed the book. She sat with it in her lap for a long, long time, and she did not speak, and Nathaniel did not press her, only lay there weak and watching, and let her feel whatever she was going to feel. When at last she looked up, her face was wet through, and she did not wipe it. "You wrote it all down," she said. "Everything you never asked me in 6 years, you went and asked everyone else." "I couldn't ask you," he said. "You were gone, and I had no right to know it from your own lips. I'd forfeited that right in the parlor. So I gathered it up the hard way, from everyone who'd seen you when I hadn't." His voice broke. "The whole county saw you, Clara. Every soul in it but me. I had to go begging your worth from other people's memories because I was too blind to have gathered any of my own." She stayed while he mended. She would not have called it a decision. It simply was. She came each morning and left each night and brought books and made broth, and slowly, day by day, they began to talk. Not about the parlor, not about the future, about small things at first, and then larger ones. About her father's sermons and his years at war. About the books she loved and had never once been asked about. About Cowper, which he had read 40 times and still did not understand, and which she explained to him, and which he understood at last, and which made him quiet for an hour after. "You know what I keep thinking," he said on the 5th day. Sitting up now, color returned, watching her mend a tear in his coat, with the same quick, sure hands that had mended half a county. "I keep thinking about all the evenings. 6 years of evenings. You in the corner with the ledgers, me by the fire, and neither of us saying a word. And I thought, when I thought of you at all, which was not often, God help me, I thought, there's Miss Whitmore, dependable as sunrise, and all that time you were sitting right there, right across the room, a whole world, a whole heart, reading Cowper and thinking your thoughts and loving me apparently, and I could have crossed the room. Any one of 2,000 evenings I could have crossed the room and said, 'Miss Whitmore, what are you reading?' and it would have changed everything, both our whole lives. 2,000 chances, Clara, and I never took a one." Clara's needle stilled. "You're taking it now," she said quietly. He looked up. "You crossed the room," she said. She did not look up from the mending. She was not sure she could. "It took you 6 years and a fever and 200 miles, and you did it the long way round, the hardest way a man could possibly do it. But you crossed the room, Nathaniel. You're across it. You're here." The coat lay forgotten in her lap. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I want you to understand that. I've never done this. I spent 6 years loving you in secret, and it near destroyed me, and I don't know how to love a man out loud in the open where he can see it. I don't know how to be wanted. I've been useful my whole life, and I've been invisible my whole life, and I have got no earthly idea how to be loved, and it frightens me more than anything ever has." Her voice shook. "So if we do this, if I let you, you'll have to be patient with me. Patient as you've never been with anything. Because I'm going to be clumsy at it. I'm going to flinch when you're kind, because kindness feels like a trick to me still. I'm going to try to serve you and shrink for you out of pure old habit, and you're going to have to stop me every time and say no. Clara, sit down. Let me. Can you do that? Can you spend your life teaching a woman how to be loved when you should have been loving her all along?" Nathaniel reached across the small space between them and took her hand gently. The way a man handles a thing he has learned too late and at great cost is more precious than his own life. "Clara Whitmore," he said, "I would spend 10 lifetimes at it and count every one of them a mercy. And I'll make you a promise. The same one I made in the ledger, only now I'll make it to your face where you can hold me to it." His hand tightened on hers. "I will never take one single thing about you for granted again as long as I live. Not one. I'll ask you what you're reading every day of my life. I'll bring you the seat by the fire and take the draft by the door. And I will never ever again let a room laugh at you, not a parlor, not a county, not one soul on this earth without they answer to me for it. I failed you once in front of everyone. I'll spend the rest of my days honoring you in front of everyone. That's my word. And I keep my word now. I learned how this summer. You taught me without ever meaning to." Clara looked down at their two hands. And then, for the first time in 6 years and 6 weeks, she let herself do the thing she had never once allowed herself to do. She turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his and held on. There was one thing more, and it came 10 days on when he was well enough to walk out, and it was not what either of them expected. They were walking by the harbor slowly, for he was still weak when a voice hailed them, and Clara turned to see a face she knew from Alice Anna Street. It was Mrs. Pell, and beside her stood a stranger, a well-dressed man with a leather case and a lawyer's careful eyes, and Mrs. Pell's face was lit up with something Clara had never seen on it. "Miss Whitmore." Mrs. Pell came bustling up. "I've been hunting you 3 days. This is Mr. Absalom Reed. He's come up from Virginia. On business. Your business." She was near breathless with it. "Tell her, Mr. Reed. Tell her what you told me." The lawyer inclined his head. "Miss Clara Whitmore, formerly companion to Mrs. Abigail Mercer of Mercer House." Something cold touched the back of Clara's neck. "Yes. Is Mrs. Mercer, is she well? Has something—" "Mrs. Mercer is in good health, ma'am, or was when I left her a week past." The lawyer opened his case. "I am here at her particular instruction. Mrs. Abigail Mercer has some 6 weeks past altered her will, and she wished me to inform you of the alteration in person rather than by post, so that you might understand it was made freely, and in her right mind, and with her whole heart." He drew out a document. "Mrs. Mercer has set aside a considerable sum, ma'am, from her own separate property moneys that were her own before her marriage, and are hers to give to found and endow in perpetuity a school for the education of poor girls. And she has named as its founder, director, and first mistress at a full and proper salary with complete authority over its affairs." The lawyer looked up. "One Miss Clara Whitmore, who is, and I quote the lady's own words, the finest mind and the truest heart I have known in 63 years of living, and the only person under my roof I ever loved without being disappointed in, and it is my dying wish that the world be made to see her worth, since my fool of a son took 6 years and could not manage it." Clara could not speak. Beside her, Nathaniel had gone very still. "There's a letter," the lawyer went on more gently now, drawing out a folded paper sealed with a familiar seal. "From the lady herself. To you. She bade me say—" He hesitated. "She bade me say that a compass is meant to point a person home, and that she hopes you have found your true north wherever it lies, and that if it should happen to lie back in Virginia, the lawyer's careful eyes flicked just once to Nathaniel. She would not be sorry, but that the school is yours regardless. Yours free and clear, whether you ever set foot in Virginia again or no. She was most particular on that point, ma'am. The gift comes with no strings. It is not a lure to bring you home. It is a debt. She said you would understand the difference. Clara took the letter with a hand that trembled, and she understood. Of course she understood. Abigail Mercer had given her a thing no one had ever given her in her whole life. Not need, not use, not a corner to be small in, but power. A school of her own. A salary. Authority. A name written into a legal document in ink, founder and director. The world made to see her worth, whether she chose the Mercers or not. The old woman had set her free twice, once with a compass at the door in the dark, and now again with a gift that asked nothing and freed everything. She did this 6 weeks ago, Clara whispered. The very week I left. Before any of this. Before he ever came looking. The very week, ma'am. Before Mr. Mercer had so much as saddled a horse. She acted the moment you were gone. The lawyer permitted himself the smallest smile. She said, and again I quote, that she was not about to sit and wait to see whether her son grew a heart in time when a good woman's future hung on it. Some things a body sees to herself, and Clara Whitmore began at last to laugh. Laugh through her tears, helpless and shaking, because it was so exactly so perfectly. Abigail and Nathaniel started laughing too weak and wondering, and Mrs. Pell beamed, and the lawyer stood there patient in the summer sun, and the harbor went on glittering behind them all. She never trusted me to manage it, Nathaniel said, wiping his eyes. My own mother. She saw the whole thing coming, and she didn't trust me for 1 minute to get there in time. So she went round me. She freed you herself so that when I came, if I came, you'd be standing on your own ground and not needing one thing from me. He shook his head, half laughing, half something that was not laughing at all. God, she's a better man than I am. She always was. She saw me, Clara said softly, holding the letter to her chest unopened, saving it. From the very first. She was the only one who ever did for 6 long years. And now she's given me a whole school full of girls so that not one of them ever has to spend 6 years learning to be small the way I did. She looked up, and her wet eyes were shining, and there was something new in them, something that had nothing to do with any man at all. That's what I'll do with it, Nathaniel. I know it now, standing right here. I'll build a place where no girl is ever invisible, where every one of them is seen from the first day, where they learn their own worth before the world ever gets a chance to teach them they haven't any. Her voice steadied into something like iron. That's the thing worth doing with a life. I see it now. Not being loved. Being useful in the way I choose, not the way that's demanded of me, but the way I choose for people who need it on my own terms and under my own name. And Nathaniel Mercer looked at her. This woman he had lived beside blind for 6 years, standing now in the full sun of a Baltimore harbor with a school in her hands and a light in her face and a future spreading out before her that had at last nothing whatever to do with him, and he did the only thing left for an honest man to do. He took off his hat, and he bowed to her, full and low the way a man bows to someone he has finally truly learned to see. Then I'll help you build it, he said. If you'll have me, not as the man who pays for it. Lord knows you don't need my money. My mother's seen to that. Not as the man who runs it. It's yours every brick, and I'll never once forget it. But as a man who'd be honored past speaking to carry the timber and haul the nails and do whatever small useful thing you'll let me for the rest of my life in the shadow of a work that's yours and not mine. He straightened hat still in his hand. I spent 6 years letting you build my whole world in silence and never thanked you. Let me spend the rest of them helping build yours out loud, where the whole county can see exactly whose hands the work belongs to. It's the only apology I've got that's worth anything. Everything else is just words. Let me give you the years, Clara. Let me give you the years. Clara did not answer him that day. That was the thing Nathaniel had learned, and learned well. She answered on her own timing now, and never a moment before, and he had stopped at long last, expecting anything else. So when she folded his offer up quiet, the way she folded everything, and said only, "Come to the school Thursday, and we'll see." He tipped his hat and went and did not press and counted the not pressing a kind of prayer. But she did not send him away either. That was the thing. She let him come Thursday, and the Thursday after. And soon he was there most days, weak still, but mending, doing exactly what he'd sworn he would. Hauling coal. Mending the roof beam that had wanted mending a year, sitting in the back of the schoolroom, while Clara taught the little ones their letters, saying not one word, only watching her with a face full of something that made the older students nudge each other and giggle behind their slates. "That gentleman's sweet on Miss Whitmore," the boy Thomas announced one afternoon, loud in the middle of a spelling lesson. The whole room dissolved. And Clara. Clara, who 6 months past would have gone scarlet, and busied herself, and made herself small. Clara set down her chalk, and put her hands on her hips, and looked square at Nathaniel Mercer in the back of the room and said, "Is that so, Mr. Mercer? Are you sweet on me?" The room held its breath. Nathaniel stood up slow, and took off his hat, and in front of 90 children and 2 teachers, and God and the afternoon sun. He said, "Yes, ma'am, I surely am. Sweetest I've ever been on anybody or anything in the whole of my life, and I don't care who hears it. You may write it on the board if you like, and make 'em all spell it." And the room erupted, and Clara laughed. Laughed out loud, head back the way she'd forgotten she could, until Baltimore taught her, and that was the day. Though neither of them said it, that the thing between them stopped being a question and became a fact. They did not marry quickly. Eleanor, who had opinions, was surprised by this and said so, and Clara set her straight. "I waited 6 years to be seen." Clara told her friend, the 2 of them at the little kitchen table where so much had been decided. "I'm not going to rush the being seen now that it's finally come. I mean to have all of it. The courting I never had. The being asked what I think. The man crossing the room to say good morning every single morning until I believe clean through that he means to keep doing it." She turned her cup in her hands. "I want to be sure, Eleanor. Not sure of him, I'm sure of him now. God help me, that man's as sure a thing as sunrise. Sure of me. Sure that when I say yes, it's a whole woman saying it who wants him and not the ghost of a small girl who needed him. I'll not marry him until I know the difference in my own bones." "And when will you know?" Clara smiled. "I'll know." She knew in the fall. It was a small thing that did it the way it's always the small things. A cold morning, the first hard frost, and she'd come down to the school to find Nathaniel already there before her on his knees at the stove, coaxing up a fire so the room would be warm before a single child arrived, doing the invisible work. The unthanked work, the work she'd done for 6 years in a house that never noticed. And he looked up when she came in, soot on his hands, and grinned at her and said, "Beat you to it. Somebody ought to keep this place warm before you get here, and I figured it may as well be me. You've kept enough rooms warm for other people. It's your turn to walk into a warm one." And Clara Whitmore stood in the doorway and understood all at once and completely that she was loved. Not needed, not used. Loved by a man who would kneel in the cold and do the small invisible work just so she could walk into warmth and want no thanks for it, and never once let her feel small for receiving it. "Nathaniel," she said. Ask me again what you asked at the harbor about the years." He went still. He rose off his knees, soot and all, and crossed the room to her. Crossed the room the way he'd failed to cross it 2,000 evenings running. Crossed it now like it was the easiest thing in the world. And he took both her hands in his soot-black ones and said, "Clara Whitmore, will you let me give you the years, all of them, every last one I've got? Will you marry me and let me spend my life learning you and never once taking you for granted and building your school beside you and keeping your rooms warm and honoring you out loud in front of the whole world for as long as we both draw breath?" "Yes," said Clara, plain and clear and whole. "Yes, on my own terms and under my own name, and because I want to, and not because I need to. Yes, Nathaniel, give me the years." They were married that winter in the little church near the school, and it was not a grand wedding, and Clara wanted it that way. But word had traveled south the way word does, and on the morning of the wedding, a carriage came up the Baltimore road that had come the whole 200 miles from Virginia, and out of it, leaning hard on her cane and refusing every hand that offered to help her, climbed Mrs. Abigail Mercer, 63 years old, and dressed in her finest, come to see the thing she'd set in motion with a compass in the dark. Clara ran to her, ran across the churchyard and caught the old woman up in her arms, and Abigail Mercer, who did not weep, wept. "You came," Clara said into her silver hair. "You came all this way." "Course I came, you foolish girl. Think I'd let my fool son marry the finest woman in the country and not be there to see it?" Abigail pulled back and held Clara at arm's length and looked at her long, taking in the straight back and the level chin and the light in the face. "There now," she said softly. "There she is. There's the woman I always knew was in there. Took walking out that door in the dark to find her, didn't it? Just like I said." Her old eyes glittered. "You took my compass, and you found your North Clara Whitmore, and it turned out to be yourself, not him, yourself. He's just lucky enough to be standing next to it." "Abigail," Clara's voice broke. "The school, the gift, I don't know how to thank you for—" "Then don't." The old woman's grip tightened. "Don't you dare thank me. You spent 6 years thanking that family for scraps. You'll not thank me for giving you one thing you didn't already earn 10 times over. That school isn't a gift, girl. It's wages. 6 years of wages that were owed you and never paid, and I paid 'em at last, and I'd have paid 10 times more and still been in your debt." She lifted her chin fierce and proud. "You want to thank me? Then you fill that school with girls, and you teach every last one of 'em to walk out any door that makes 'em small, and to walk out it with their chin up the way you did. That's the only thanks I'll take. That's the only thanks worth having." And Clara married Nathaniel Mercer, with the old woman watching from the front pew, and when the minister asked who gave this woman, it was Abigail who rose up on her cane and said in a voice that carried to the rafters, "Nobody gives her. She gives herself. Get on with it." And the whole church laughed. But this time Clara understood, standing at the front in the light. This time they were not laughing at her. They were laughing with her. That was the whole difference in the world. Chapter. Nathaniel kept his word. That was the thing that mattered in the years that followed. Not the wedding, not the grand gestures, but the daily keeping of a plain promise. He asked her what she was reading. Every day of his life, some part of every day, he crossed whatever room they were in and asked her what she was reading and listened to the answer, and by the end of their years together, he had read every book she loved, some of them 40 times, and come to love a few of them himself. He took the draft by the door and gave her the seat by the fire, always without being asked, until it stopped being a thing he did to make up for the past and became simply the shape of who he was. And he honored her out loud. He did that too, and it cost him sometimes, and he did it anyway, for the county did not forget. Word had gone round, word always goes round, about the companion who'd been laughed out of Mercer House and come back a schoolmistress with a fortune behind her and Nathaniel Mercer on her arm, and there were those, the Ashfords chief among them, who did not care for the story one bit. It came to a head, as these things do at a gathering. They'd gone back to Virginia by then, not to live, for the school kept Clara mostly in Baltimore, but for a season to see Abigail and settle affairs, and there was a supper at a neighbor's, and half the old county was there, and among them Lydia Ashford, married now to a Richmond banker and not improved by it. It was Lydia who said it. Loud over the tea, the way the colonel had said the thing that started it all 6 years and a lifetime ago. "I confess I'm surprised, Mr. Mercer, that you'd bring your wife—" The pause was a knife back among us, after the way she left, slipping off before dawn like a servant who'd stolen the silver. I'd have thought she'd have the sense to stay gone. Some doors, once a person's shown out of them, oughtn't to be walked back through. The room went quiet. It was the parlor all over again. The same warm room, the same comfortable people, the same cruel little laugh waiting to be born. And Clara felt the old pull to go small, to smile the invisible smile, to fetch more tea and disappear. 6 years of habit rising up. But before she could so much as draw breath, Nathaniel Mercer set down his cup. He set it down with a click that carried, and he stood, and the room felt him stand, and every eye turned to him. "Mrs. Ashford," he said. His voice was quiet. It was not angry. It was something worse than angry, it was certain. 6 years ago, in a parlor much like this one, a room full of people laughed at my wife. I was the one who gave them leave. I made a joke of her in front of everyone, and I have spent every day since trying to earn back the right to stand in a room and call myself her husband. He turned slow and let his eyes go round the whole company, and there was not one soul in it who could meet them. So I'll say this once plain, so nobody here has to wonder. That woman ran my family's house for 6 years and asked nothing. She fed the widows of this county out of her own wages while your husbands drank my wine. She kept the parish relief fund out of her own pocket and never let a soul know. There is not a person in this room who has not at some time eaten off a table she set, or been warmed at a fire she thought to lay, or been saved from some embarrassment she quietly prevented before you ever knew you were near it. She held up half this county for 6 years invisible, and the whole lot of you let her and called it her duty. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, and then one of you laughed at her, Nathaniel said, and she had the courage to walk out the door and become the finest schoolmistress in the state of Maryland. And I had to ride 200 miles and near die of a fever to earn the honor of standing here beside her. He looked at Lydia Ashford, and he did not raise his voice, and that was the terrible power of it. So you'll forgive me, Mrs. Ashford, if I don't much care for talk of doors she oughtn't walk back through. She can walk through any door in this county she pleases. She earned every one of them, and any room that won't have her. He reached down and took Clara's hand and drew her up to stand beside him. Is a room I've no wish to be in. Good evening. And Nathaniel Mercer put on his hat and gave his wife his arm, and walked her out of that parlor, out with her chin up in front of everyone, and this time it was not a flight in the dark. This time it was a procession. This time the whole room watched a woman leave with her head high on the arm of a man who'd just laid down his own good name to lift hers up, and not one of them laughed. Not one of them ever laughed at Clara Whitmore again. Outside in the cool of the evening, Clara stopped him on the step. "You didn't have to do that," she said, but her eyes were wet and her voice was full. "I could have borne it. I've borne worse from better. I know you could have." Nathaniel turned to face her. "That's exactly why I had to. Not because you couldn't stand it, Clara. Because you never should have had to. There's the whole difference. For 6 years you bore things you never should have had to bear alone in silence, and I stood by and let you. I'm done letting you. You'll bear nothing alone again as long as I'm alive to stand beside you. And when I'm gone," his voice caught, "you'll be so strong and so seen and so surrounded by people who know your worth that you'll never have to bear anything alone then either. That's what the years are for, Clara. That's what I'm building alongside your school, a life where you are never ever invisible again." And Clara Whitmore. Clara Mercer now stepped in close and laid her head against his chest and let herself be held in the open in the evening air, where anyone at all might see. She had learned to do that. It had taken her a long time, but she had learned. Ted. The years came and the years passed the way they do. The school grew. What began as 90 children in a leaking building on Alice Anna Street became in time 2 schools and then 3, the Whitmore schools they were called for. Clara kept her own name over the door, and Nathaniel insisted on it. Insisted the name that had been laughed at in a parlor should be the name carved in stone over a place where poor girls learned they were worth something. Hundreds of girls passed through those doors across the years. Thousands before it was done. Girls who came in small and frightened and left with their chins up. Girls who'd been told they were nothing and learned in Clara's rooms that they were something. Girls who went on to teach their own schools and raise their own daughters and walk out of their own dark doors when the rooms they stood in tried to make them small, and every one of them carried a piece of Clara Whitmore out into the world, whether they knew her name or not. She taught them the letters and the figures and the reading of good books. But that was not the real lesson, and Clara knew it, and so did they. The real lesson she taught them was the one Abigail Mercer had given her at a door in the dark with a compass pressed into her hand. She taught them not to spend their lives becoming smaller so that other people might feel comfortable. She taught them to take up every inch of room the good Lord gave them. She taught them that being needed was not the same as being loved, that being useful was not the same as being seen, and that no worth you had to beg for was worth the begging. And she taught them the last thing, the truest thing, the thing she had learned the hard way in a Virginia parlor and a Baltimore harbor, and a whole life lived twice once small and once whole. She taught them that a woman does not become valuable the day a man finally sees her. She becomes free the day she finally sees herself. Abigail Mercer lived to see the second school open and held Clara's first daughter in her arms before she went and died in her own bed with Clara sitting up beside her the way Clara had always sat up with her. Only now it was a daughter's vigil and not a servant's, and the old woman knew the difference and said so at the end. "You were the finest thing that ever came into that house," she whispered, her hand in Clara's. "And I'm the only one who saw it in time to say so." "Well, I said so, didn't I? I made sure to say so." "You said so." Clara wept. "You were the first. You were always the first." Somebody had to be. And Abigail Mercer smiled and closed her eyes and was gone. Nathaniel kept every promise he ever made her to the end of his days. He asked her what she was reading every morning of his life, and on the last morning of his life, old and gray and failing, he asked it still. "What are you reading, Clara?" And she read to him from Cowper, the passage he'd puzzled over 40 times in a fever long ago and finally come to understand. And he listened with his eyes closed and a smile on his face, and when she finished, he said, "I understand it now. I've understood it for years. It's about you. It was always about you." And those were near the last words he spoke, and Clara held them the rest of her life. She outlived him by 11 years, and she was not invisible in them, not for one single day. She was Clara Whitmore of the Whitmore schools, known the length of the state, sought out and honored and loved, surrounded to the end by the people who had learned their worth in her rooms and never forgot the woman who'd taught it. When she went at last, full of years, they lined the streets for her, hundreds of them. The girls she'd taught, grown women now with girls of their own, and not one of them stood at the edge of the crowd because she had spent her whole life teaching them never to stand at the edge of anything again. They buried her under a stone that said at her own instruction, "Only this." She saw herself, and then the whole world saw her too, and that was the truth of it, and the whole of it, and the end of it. Clara Whitmore had walked out of a warm, bright house in the dark before dawn, laughed at unseen and certain she was nothing, and she had walked by her own 2 feet and her own fierce heart, all the way to a life so full and so seen and so entirely her own that the laughter of that parlor could not touch it, could not reach it, could not ever again make her small. She had not waited to be rescued. She had not waited to be chosen. She had walked out of the dark and built her own light, and only then, standing full in the middle of it, needing nothing and no one, had she reached out and taken the hand of a man who had finally learned to see her. And that is why she won. Not because a man came to his senses, not because an old woman was kind, but because a woman who had every reason to stay small found in the coldest hour of her life the courage to stand up to her full height and never ever bend down again. Clara Whitmore saw herself, and no one on this earth ever made her small again.